Welcome to Godsplaining, Contemplative Preachers, Contemporary Age. Each week, join the Dominican friars as they consider all things Catholic.
Welcome to Godsplaining. This is Father Bertrand Janczyk. I'm here today with our very own Father Patrick Briscoe. How you doing, Father Patrick?
Hello, friends.
Friends, wow, that's very inviting. That's great. So I guess start by saying a blessed Triduum. Today is Holy Thursday. So obviously the holiest days of our faith and of our liturgical life. So hopefully this year, unlike last year, where you, our listeners, are able to get to these liturgies in person and don't just have to listen to us talk about things on the podcast and can actually worship in person this year. So we're certainly praying for you these days, and we'll continue through the Easter season, of course. So Father Patrick, speaking of Holy Week, I was going to say, are you doing anything for Holy Week? Of course you are, because you're a priest, and priests do a lot during the Triduum. So, but what does that look like for you in Providence this year?
Well, one of the things that's a little bit different for us is we'll actually have students around. So a few of us from the chaplaincy are supporting the Triduum at St. Pius Church, the parish church right at Providence College. So I'll be attending most of the liturgies there. Father James Sullivan, the infamous pastor of St. Pius V, our novice master, which is why Father Bertrand and I are sort of chuckling.
Yep.
So we call him infamous. Father James
Everything that we're good at in the Dominican life is from Father James, and everything we're bad at in the Dominican life is from Father James.
From Father James, yeah, it's true. Yeah. He's responsible for it all, good, bad, and otherwise.
Yep.
He invited me to be the celebrant and preacher on Good Friday. So I think he was looking for somebody to really bring it down, and to take them into the depths and the dark. I can certainly do that. So
that's beautiful.
After this year of COVID, I've got plenty of clouds, so we could descend into the depths of the Lord.
Great.
We are going to sing the Passion, though. That's going to be really exciting. So Father Justin Bolger of the Hillbilly Thomas is going to be the narrator, and I'll be the Christ, being the celebrant and preacher. And then we have a little turba, a crowd, singing the responses from the choir loft. So
that's very cool.
We're using the arrangement. We're using the arrangement that was done by Father Michael O'Connor from the House of Studies. So I really like the chords and the way that he scripted the text. I just think it's very well done. And it was super easy to coordinate in the parish too. So I have a lot of hopes of how beautiful that will be. So you don't often say like, oh, what's your highlight? So my highlight is going to be Good Friday.
That's great. Yeah, that setting of the chanting of the Passion is something that we do in a lot of our communities, and the Christ and the narrator are obviously solo voices, but the turba, the crowd, as Father Patrick was talking about, is a choir that sings in harmony. So you have these great kind of like explosions of the crowd. It's really quite powerful. It's great. We do the same here at the House of Studies. So and we did in our novitiate at St. Gertrude. So that's great. Speaking of singing, one of my Triduum is wrapped with singing this year for myself. So there's the House of Studies has a schola, but Father Michael O'Connor, who Father Patrick mentioned, is our schola director and formed an octet of some friars who sing a bit more. So I haven't sung with the schola in a long time, but it'll be fun to sing throughout the Triduum. So
well, look at you, an octet.
I know.
A fancy singer.
A fancy singer, that's right.
Did you audition, Father?
No, it was. I don't audition. It's only invite.
Invite only.
Yeah.
Sounds very exclusive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my agent spoke to them. All the these sort of things. Yeah. So no, but I'm looking forward to it. And then cooking Easter dinner. I'm on the cook. I'm not the head cook, but on the cooking crew here for Easter Sunday. So that's always a big thing. Cooking for 70 friars. So I'm excited for that. So
those meals are always so much fun to prep for.
They are. I mean, it's just a big crowd in the kitchen all day. So
do you remember the year Father Davenport cooked the Easter bunny?
He did. He made rabbit for Easter. And yeah, great. Bless his heart. He's another of our classmates formed by Father James. So, and actually, Father Patrick, that's a wonderful way to transition into today's topic, because dealing with Father Thomas at times, especially eating the Easter bunny, required a lot of fortitude, a lot of patience, a lot of perseverance, all things we're going to cover today. So today's episode on this Holy Thursday is not about what Father Patrick and I are doing over the coming days, really, but about the seventh and final virtue that we're talking about in this Back to Virtue series throughout Lent, the virtue of fortitude. So just by way of recapping where we've been the last 6 weeks, we started the week before Lent because we couldn't squeeze all 7 into the 6 weeks of Lent, so we started the week before. But we started talking with the theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity, and then the last 3 weeks, prudence, justice, and temperance, 3 of the 4 cardinal or moral virtues. We'll finish with the 4th, fortitude, today. But just as a reminder about virtues in general, if this is the first time you're tuning in to these virtue episodes, then this is good for you to listen here. If you've listened to other ones, well, you've gotten this, but you're getting it again. But the virtues, what are they? It's always helpful to know what we're talking about. The virtues are tools in the Christian life, tools of Christian perfection that function within the dispensation of grace, we would say. So God gives us graces to act in a particular way. And this particular way is really what we would call an imitatio Christi, an imitation of Christ. Christ had the fullness of virtues. Christ had the fullness of what it meant to be human, but also while maintaining his divine nature. He had the fullness of virtues, and as Christians, we're called to live the fullness of human life, which is dictated, guided by the virtues. So I mentioned those 3, Father Patrick, the theological virtues. If you could just give us like a super quick soundbite, on each, faith, hope, charity, what they are, why they're theological, and then we'll cruise right into the moral virtues.
Sure. So the theological virtues, again, as we've continued to say, those are the virtues that pertain directly to God. So they orient us to heaven, and they allow us to see things from heaven's perspective, and they modify their perfective qualities of the human condition in their own way. So they modify the intellect and the will. So faith is a habit of mind, allowing us to believe unto God, to believe in the things that God said, and to be united to God by virtue of our intellect, by virtue of our mind. Hope and charity, however, are the will. So hope allows us to have a confidence of heart in the things that God has planned for us. Different than knowing, right? To have the strength of heart, the confidence in the faithfulness of God to His promises, and that we will attain them. So not only that God will give us these things, but it will be possible. To grasp them. That's hope. And then charity is to delight in God directly. So that sharing of God's own life, which bonds us to the Lord. Charity is union, or as we talk about it in the Thomistic tradition, charity is friendship with God. So those are the 3 of the theological virtues, and they are so grand because they are required. They require God's grace. It's the Lord that gives them. You can't manufacture faith. You can't manufacture hope. You can't manufacture charity. All of these things are dependent on God's own divine life. And so for this reason, they're very different than the moral virtues, right?
Yeah, the moral virtues as opposed to the theological. The moral, as Father Patrick was saying, the object of the theological virtues, the thing at which they are aimed is God himself. The object of the moral virtues is human action. Really, they direct our action and the control of our faculties. Now, these can be oriented to God, and they should be oriented to God, but they don't have God himself as their object. So if we think of prudence, right, remember that prudence is the virtue that disposes practical reason. It directs our reason to discern our true good in every circumstance. So it directs all of our actions. It helps us choose, we often say, make a prudent decision here, or maybe that's more of a Dominican thing to say rather than, as a vocation director, rather than discerning everything, I'd say make prudent choices. Justice dictates our relationship to another, rendering another his due. And temperance, we talked about last week, governs what we call the concupiscible appetites. It governs our relation to external objects that are either easy to get or easy to avoid. And we'll talk about the appetite in a second, because fortitude has to do with the appetites. But those virtues, as Father Patrick said, they're different because we can acquire them certainly through, in a sort of non-supernatural way. We can make acts of prudence that are moved by grace, but they can also be infused in us directly from God as a grace. So I think by way of review, we kind of cover it all. If you want more, you know where you can go. You can just look back to the week when we talked about the particular virtue and listen to that episode. See? There you go. Okay, let's talk about fortitude then in particular. What is the virtue of fortitude? I'll say this, at least with respect to a general notion, that we often think of fortitude as kind of a courage, right? Something that gives us some bravery or courage or a resolve, a sort of strength of character to do things. But when we talk about courage in the sense of the virtue, we're talking about something a little bit more here. I guess walk us through that, Father Patrick.
Yeah, so St. Thomas Aquinas would tell us that fortitude is the firmness of will that strengthens this irascible appetite to continue to pursue the difficult good in face of grave danger. Okay, so that's very complicated and jargony. But what's the first thing that is most striking about this? I remember being just stunned when I learned that Aquinas thought that fortitude was the ability to face the threat of death. This is the key. This is what courage is about. Courage is about being able to be steadfast even when the greatest goods of health and person are threatened. So we have to start that high, right? To say, what is this virtue actually about? This virtue is about being able to do what is good and what is right when one's own existence, when one's own life is threatened, right? So I think that has to be our starting place, and then we can unpack all the rest of it, right? But that's really the key for St. Thomas.
Right. Yeah. It's too easy, I think, to think that the virtues, because especially the moral virtues, because they govern human action, that they sort of have a cap, like a ceiling, that they only kind of pertain to the things of this world. You know, they only deal with our earthly existence. But really, the virtues, that they govern human action. Our human action is not divorced from our relationship with God. In fact, this is why we're given grace even with the moral virtues. We're not just supposed to be like virtuous pagans, in the sense that like we're like just a good civil secular citizen, but that we're good Christian citizens of this earth. So when Father Patrick makes the point that this is that fortitude is that virtue that helps us, that enables us to face death, that's the prime object and the prime analogate. Now we can use the virtue of fortitude can be activated in different circumstances that don't necessarily involve a direct threat of death, but that's the prime analogate. And later on in the episode, when we talk about living fortitude, this is also kind of sometimes I like to think of this as like the virtue of the martyrs. Fortitude, right. Obviously the martyrs are full of charity and faith and hope, but fortitude is like, I think often of the virtue of the martyrs. But it doesn't always have to be a glorious kind of reality. So Father Patrick also mentioned the appetites, and I did too before. Father, do you want to...
Yeah, let's sit with that.
Yeah, is it like, am I hungry appetite? Let me get fortitude so I don't die from hunger. What are we talking about?
What do we mean by this?
I'm always hungry, and I always want food. So
it's because for years you were used to burning 6,000 calories a day as a world-class steeplechase racer.
As a world-class bodybuilder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are the appetites to which we're referring? Well, for Aquinas and other classical thinkers, the soul has different parts. And so when we talk about the irascible appetite, we're talking about a particular thing that is desired in the soul. So the concupiscible appetite, these are really the goods of pleasure, right? And they're easy enough for us to obtain. So temperance is the virtue that modifies the concupiscible appetites. That desire particularly for sensual pleasure. That appetite, which is just kind of we might call it the most base, but that's a little too negative. The most human or immediate instinctual kind of thing we desire. That's another way to think about it. And that's the concupiscible appetite. So concupiscence is the sinful condition whereby we desire those things, right? You could connect concupiscence and the concupiscible appetite. The irascible appetite, though, is not as sensual. So these are the things that are a little bit more difficult to obtain or to avoid. They're still in the will, right? We're still talking about not the will properly, but we're still talking about the soul and our desire. This irascible appetite is then moderated by fortitude as a special thing. So here the irascible appetite is something a little bit more abstract, and it's very easy to see with fortitude because it includes fear, right? That kind of fight or flight instinct. So you can see how that instinct would be very different from the desire for sensual pleasure, right?
Yeah, I think something that sometimes there's a criticism that's levied against St. Thomas or some of the more scholastic theologians and thinkers of the church, and that they sort of are very kind of cold in their approach. There's not a lot of emotion, and they just have all of these distinctions and make lists and that sort of thing. Whereas if you compare Aquinas to Augustine, they write very differently. I mean, Augustine writes in this sort of poetry and these stories, and if you look at the Summa Theologica, it's question, answer, and these sort of things. But for here, with this is where we see kind of the scholastic distinction shine, because as Father Patrick was saying, that the soul has different powers and different abilities, and we know that just simply by observing what the person does. So because I can think about things in an abstract way, then we would say that the soul has the power of reason. Because I can react to things or I can grow. All of us grow. We're not the same. I'm not the same size I am now that I was when I was born. We have these kind of vegetative kind of powers of the soul just for growth and for food and nourishment. Same thing with the senses, the sort of sensual kind of part of our body. And sensual here for Thomas doesn't mean sexual necessarily. Sensual just means our senses are involved. So even think of our 5 senses that we have, but also our concupiscible and irascible senses to things. So fortitude pertains to those difficult things. And Father Patrick was talking about fear and our response to fear. And we'll break down some of the parts of fortitude in the second half of our episode, just after our break. And then we're going to talk about how we live fortitude, how to cultivate the virtue of fortitude in our lives, and which should be an important thing for us to consider because it pertains to our death and our persevering in the face of death. So with that, we're going to take a short break, but we will be right back.
You are listening to Godsplaining. Visit us at godsplaining.org to listen to our episodes, shop our store, and donate to our podcast. All gifts go to improving the podcast and bringing the gospel to more listeners. Thanks for your support.
Welcome back to Godsplaining. I'm Father Jacob Bertrand, and I'm here with Father Patrick on this Holy Thursday. And today we're wrapping up our Back to Virtue series, talking about the seventh of the principal virtues, right? 3 theological, 4 cardinal, moral. I don't know. Is there a title for all 7 of them that I don't know of?
Virtues.
The great virtues, the principal virtues. I don't know.
We always distinguish between the cardinal and the theological.
Yeah, so we don't really lump them together, but we will today. They're lumped together as the great principal virtues.
That's beautiful. We might call them the lumped virtues then.
We're not going to call them that. We might not call them that. Let's just be clear. That's not going to happen. But it's a nice effort. But see, we come to the best titles because we try things out. We're not afraid, and we'll persevere in this, and we'll pray for the virtue of magnanimity, this greatness, to come up with the best title. So see,
wow, I see what you did there.
Coming attractions. So for the first half of the episode, we were talking about what fortitude is. Fortitude, that virtue that moderates the irascible appetite, the part of us that responds to things that are difficult to obtain, or goods that are difficult to obtain, or evils that are difficult to avoid, and we need to react. And the virtue of fortitude does that for us, in us, allows us to do that. I think that's the better way to say it. So let's look at 3 kind of areas. So when we were talking about, I was mentioning how the scholastics are good at making distinctions, and Thomas is kind of the king of this. And when he looks at the virtues, he always talks about the vices and the parts of the virtues. So let's talk about some of the parts of the virtues and then the vices to kind of get a more, global scope of the virtue of fortitude. So we can identify 2 acts of the virtue of fortitude. One is attack, and one is endure. I guess in common parlance, just kind of like the fight or flight, but not really flight because it's endurance.
Not really flight.
So
yeah.
No, I'm wrong. So let's not use that. Scratch that. That won't be edited out either. But there you go. So attack or endure. Father, what do we mean? Like attack, like fight back? Is that what we're talking about?
Actually, yes. In the sense that it's an action, right, and really doing something. So fortitude is often depicted, you see depictions of the virtue of fortitude. Fortitude is often depicted with a shield or with a sword, recognizing that fortitude is about engaging in the battle, that there's a manfulness to be had here, a defensive and active aspect to the virtue. So the act of fortitude, the attack, is the response to any kind of aggression that is put on us, right? And again, we said at the top of the episode, I said for St. Thomas, fortitude is about the danger of death, and so here the principal act is fighting back. The response here. That this is where we have to start. And so when we think about great acts of courage, we think about things that are really grand, and for that reason, magnanimity is one of these associated virtues, and it's connected with this principal act of fortitude of attack, because magnanimity is the kind of greatness of soul. It's the part of fortitude that allows us to do something really big, really grand, right? Magnanimity. The great example of magnanimity is the firefighter that runs into the burning building in order to save someone. At the risk of his own life. He's doing something truly heroic. Or the policeman that puts himself in danger, right, to save another citizen. So this involves a kind of grandeur, a height, a real nobility, and that's that kind of striking back and doing something forward that draws one outside of oneself.
Yeah, I think that nobility of virtue with the magnanimity is really important, because often we think in the Christian life of like how am I to behave? The virtue that often comes up is humility, which actually falls under the virtue of temperance, but is humility. But it's not just humility is not a cowering. It's not a sort of like, I can never lift my head up. I have to beat myself up, because it should be paired with this virtue that falls under fortitude of magnanimity that Father was just talking about. Magnanimity is that virtue that inclines us to perfect some great act. It calls us to greatness. Humility tempers that by calling us to appropriate greatness. But we are called to greatness. We're called to greatness in serving God, whether that's, as Father was saying, with being a firefighter, being a police officer, being a soldier, being a doctor, or the greatness of being a mother and a homeschooler, or the greatness of suffering your death well in your bed. These things. Greatness is not determined by earthly worth, but by responding to what is before us in a saintly way. And I think that I was just going to say something about this sort of attack response that we do. We attack the devil. We attack, there is a spiritual warfare. There is a real warfare here. I remember this a few months ago, probably in the fall, when Sister Dee Dee Byrne. Do you remember? She's a nun. She's a surgeon, but also a nun. And she gave a talk at the Republican National Convention, and in that she said that we grab our rosaries as our weapons or something like that, right? And I remember somebody responding in the social media world saying, "Well, no, we don't. As Christians, we don't use weapons." And it's like, no, hold up. Sister is absolutely right. Yes, we do, because there's a real spiritual combat here, and that, our prayer and the virtues, these are the devil's trying to attack us, but grace and these virtues are our weapons to persevere, especially fortitude in these difficult settings.
Right.
But there's also, I think, there's a quiet side to fortitude, if that makes sense, Father Patrick. There are a couple virtues.
So this is the second act. We've placed a lot of emphasis here on the first act of fortitude, which is the act of aggression or attack. But the second act of fortitude is even more noble for Aquinas. It's a still grander thing. And it's more noble because, frankly, it's more difficult. And so here's where Aquinas has the great reconciliation between the gospel and the tradition of the ancient world. Because for Aquinas, the greatest examples of fortitude are the martyrs. And why are the martyrs so great? Well, because they are able to endure and to persevere despite great suffering and great death. Very painful death, that is. So endurance, this idea of being able to stick with it, is for Aquinas part of fortitude, because it's not a passive thing. It requires still an act of the will. To endure is not just to merely tolerate or put up with or bear with, but it's really to fight. And so for Aquinas, these allied virtues that support this act of endurance are so important. So patience and perseverance are things that we do. I mean, I remember coming to the Dominican order, and one friar who was preaching a retreat in the novitiate told us very bluntly as novices, "Brothers, pray always for the grace of perseverance." In the hope that we would die as Dominicans, that we would be able to be faithful to the vows and to the life of the gospel. Perseverance is a real thing, and it takes a clinging on. which is why in public life we see and bear sadness when there are priests or others who don't persevere, who cast it off. So Father, maybe you have more to say about patience and perseverance. Father Jacob is such a patient man, so he really is a grand expert of patience. So this will be really rich, him unpacking patience for us.
I would say I'm more predictable than I am patient, Father Patrick, but that's most of my responses can be played out before I even respond. But that's kind of you. I'm not a patient person. I'm an ornery person. But the first step to change is, recognizing the need for change. So here I am recognizing. Isn't that
now
great?
We're demonstrating humility. We just have all the virtues.
Okay, enough. Yeah, I think the importance here of the virtue of fortitude and patience and perseverance is highlighted by the fact that there is a sacrament intimately associated with these realities, and that's the sacrament of the anointing of the sick. Remember that fortitude, as we've said a few times, that fortitude is the object of fortitude, and what it's ultimately oriented to is persevering or having courage in the face of death, attacking in the face of death, certainly the temptations of the devil, but enduring the pains and the sufferings and the loneliness and all the sickness and all of that of death. There are these great, I can't say great enough, Dominican sisters, the Dominican Sisters of Hawthorne. They were founded by Rose Hawthorne, Nathaniel Hawthorne's daughter, and they were founded to care first for terminally ill cancer patients, but they care for a lot of the sick. These women, holy, and they work like nobody's business. They are incredible women. If you're thinking of a vocation and want to work with the sick, the Hawthorne Dominican Sisters are, look no further. But one of the things they said is that part of the nursing work that they do is that they also are sort of the spiritual care for these people, and that in witnessing and being with countless people who have died, they attest. The one sister said that the battle's not over to the last moment. The battle's not over to the last moment, that Satan's trying to tempt people away from the good, from Christ, in their loneliness and pain and suffering, even into the last moment. So the sacrament of anointing of the sick is not there to heal the sick, though it may, but it's there to strengthen the sick in the face of death, to strengthen them, particularly in this virtue of fortitude and of hope. So I don't think we can hammer home enough the importance of that. But I'll say this, and kind of leave it here, at least on this point, is that these sorts of things, remember that we are what we do. We build habits, and our character is built on what we do. The virtues are habitus. We've talked about that in a couple of our previous episodes. So it's very important to think now, if we want to be prepared for a happy and a holy death, to start practicing the virtues now, so as to be trained in them now, so that they can be called upon in the moments of great necessity. So this is the whole point of the life of virtue, is that we practice the virtues and pray for them throughout our entirety of the life, so that way they can be called upon in those most extreme moments. So one of the last things we'll say, at least about this, and then a few things about living fortitude, that the vices of the virtues are always sailing through the middle of vices, and Father Patrick alluded to this with the firefighter example. But two of the vices that are associated with the virtue are fear and fearlessness. So cowardice and braggadociousness, is that something? I guess if you use the firefighter example, here the virtuous and the firefighter who exercises fortitude is the one who runs into the burning building to save somebody who's trapped. But the vice here, the lack of fortitude, could be seen in two ways. Well, he doesn't run in when he needs to save somebody because of fear. He's overcome by fear. Or the fearlessness, which is also a lack of fortitude, is that he runs into a burning building when it's empty. That's not courage. That's stupidity. That lacks the virtue. So we can see that the greatness of the virtues is that it fine-tunes our actions to do the good thing promptly, joyously, and easily, as Thomas says. Just highlights it a little bit more. So we've kind of walked through fortitude. We have a handful of minutes left. So let's talk about living the virtue of fortitude, how to live it, how to grow in it. Any thoughts here, Father Patrick?
Yeah, I think part of the way that we succeed in Christian living, right, is looking to examples and living in our lives what they teach us. So who are you, dear listener? Who are you thinking of when you think of someone who is courageous, who is it that you think has the virtue of fortitude? I mean, one example that I like to give is Samwise Gamgee in The Lord of the Rings, right? Because his fortitude is the kind of faithful perseverance that every Christian needs. He's not a stoic. Sam is very emotional. He's very, very devoted to Frodo. But neither is he some kind of listless waif. I mean, like we could think of the great scene where they're approaching Mount Doom, right? Where Samwise puts Frodo up on his shoulder and carries that little hobbit to destroy the ring when Frodo himself can't take another step. That is what perseverance looks like. That is real fortitude. Heading into the land of doom, the land of darkness, but intent and fixed on the goal, so as to be completely undeterred from it.
Yeah, I too have an example from literature and from the other great author C.S. Lewis and The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, Reepicheep. At the end of The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, this little mouse guy, big mouse guy, but he's great. He's kind of, always ready to fight somebody throughout the books. But there's this beautiful scene when they're reaching the end of the world, towards the east, and he says, he just wants to go on to the east. He just wants to go to Aslan's country. And as they're at the eastern edge of the world, when the ship can go no further, he says this: "While I can, I sail east in the Dawn Treader. When she fails me, I paddle east in my coracle. When she sinks, I shall swim east with my 4 paws. And when I can swim no longer, if I have not reached Aslan's country or shot over the edge of the world into some vast cataract, I shall sink with my nose to the sunrise." It's so beautiful. This little mouse, he's going to do everything he can to persevere to get to Aslan, who's of course God in this. And I think these characters from literature, show forth the virtues in a way that we can kind of think about them in a kind of fanciful way. But also these virtues are, as Father Patrick said, living in the martyrs. Every time in the churches, in our life, in the divine office, we pray the office of readings. And when we get to a celebration of a martyr's feast day, there's also often a recounting of the martyr's death or like a letter from his last days. And you hear these in their words, they're not deluded. They're not deluded about what's coming. They're not fearful. But their hope and what they're looking at is Christ. And they're full of prayer, and even in their death, they're full of prayer. So these men and women who are sort of the highest example of this virtue really show to us that even in simple kind of things, we may not be martyred, but we are asked to give our lives for Christ day in and day out. They're great examples. Father Patrick, you also mentioned too this praying for this perseverance. What is, I guess, just a word on what that might look like for us?
Yeah, that's right. So we, when we're talking about the moral virtues, the cardinal virtues, that's the big 4, not the top 3, but the big 4 in the lump of 7.
Okay.
We're talking always about the kind of thing that can be sharpened and fine-tuned by our action, but then also enhanced by God's grace. So when we pray for perseverance, when we pray for an outpouring of fortitude in our lives, it's the kind of fortitude that can reach the kingdom, the kind of thing that can echo into eternity, that can extend beyond our actions. And so this is what allows the saints to do great things. It's the kind of thing that made Monica a tender mother of her son and a faithful spouse despite a very difficult marriage. Or it's the kind of thing that makes a saint brave for leaving his homeland, like Patrick of Ireland, one of Father Jacob Bertrand's favorite saints. It's the kind of thing that made Patrick of Ireland adventurous and not foolhardy, for desiring to spread the gospel in a foreign land. Because according to the metric of the world, the virtues resonate differently, but with God's grace, they ring and echo with far greater sound. So,
yeah. All right. Well, as we get into Holy Week on this Holy Thursday, perhaps the virtue of fortitude or another virtue is something that we can offer or pray for in these coming days. We will certainly be praying for you through the Triduum and ask you to pray for us too, that we together can celebrate the joy of the resurrection in just a few days' time. Persevere. It's almost there. We'll make it through the fast of Good Friday and get to rejoice at the vigil and on Easter Sunday. We're praying in a special way for all of those who are going to be received into the church this Easter, for all of our catechumens and candidates. So know of our prayers there too. A few announcements, a few things at the end here. We, of course, as you know, launched a merchandise store probably a couple months ago now. So there's great stuff there. We're launching an Easter merchandise item, these nice sweatshirts with the crucifixion image that we have on a sticker right now, but it's also will be put on sweatshirts, so check those out as part of our Easter gift to one or two of you. I was going to say all of you, not all of you. We're going to give away a couple of those sweatshirts. So if you would rate the podcast, leave a review of the podcast of the show on Apple Podcasts, we'll have a drawing in a week or so and give away a couple of those sweatshirts. So please do rate and review the show. It helps us out immensely. Thanks to all of our benefactors, all of our donors. If you're interested in donating to the podcast and supporting the podcast, check us out on our Patreon page. Also, by way of a final announcement, don't forget that we are hosting a retreat this summer with the 5 of us hosts, myself, Father Patrick, Father Joseph Anthony, Father Bonaventure, and Father Gregory, in Huntington, New York, July 23rd through 25th for young adults. If you're interested in that, I would recommend checking it out quickly because it is filling up fast. So if you'd like a spot on that, you should register sooner than later. Other than that, Father Patrick, I think that's everything. Is that right? Am I forgetting anything?
Yeah, we can progress now to the final blessing and the conclusion of Holy Mass.
Are we doing that?
Well, you were giving the announcements.
Oh, I was going to say,
That's just where my mind always goes. It's like, okay. Can we leave? Are the donuts out yet?
Thanks, Father Patrick. That's a blessing. Well, we won't belabor this anymore. So thanks for tuning in. And until next time, God bless.
Thanks for listening to Godsplaining, a work of the Dominican friars of the province of St. Joseph. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Leave a review on your podcast app. And visit us at godsplaining.org.